Welcome to Becoming Limitless. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs who want to optimize their life for freedom. I'm going to teach you how to upgrade your health, money, and mindset so you can have more energy, time freedom, and financial independence. I'm your host, Tanessa Shears. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Becoming Limitless podcast. I hope you've been having a really good week so far. This week has been upside down. At the time I'm recording this, we found out that our landlord actually sold the house and we got served our 2 months to be out letter exactly from a week ago today. So the last week has been me creating lists, problem solving. That's how I respond to things. I'm a list creator. And it's so funny because my husband looked at the list and he's like, oh my gosh, your list gives me anxiety. And I'm like, it's cool. I'll just tell you what's coming and I'll make the list. And so I've been over here making all of the lists. But in part of that, if you listened to the episode that I did on financial independence on the podcast, I did it. It was episode 129 called the Financial Independence Update. You'll know that instead of getting into another rental, we have actually decided to put everything we own into storage and travel part-time on and off over the next 8 months to a year and just really explore the world. We already had a month planned in September to travel, and we were going to travel for a couple of months in January. So it didn't make sense to lock in an expensive Vancouver rental in October just to go away for 4 months in January. So we're going to be kind of doing the family digital nomad thing, and there's a lot going on with that. But right now we are just doing an absolute purge because it's really interesting because we're putting our life into a storage locker. You really start to look at the stuff that you have and you're like, do I use this? And I mean, there's some stuff that I'm like, oh, why have I been carrying this from house to house? I haven't used this in 5 years, in 10 years. There's shoes my husband's never even seen me in. So, I mean, those have to be old. But the really interesting question, if you're in a house purge at all at any point, or you're just going through your stuff, I love to clean out a closet on a weekend. That's fun for me. But if you ever look at your stuff and you're like, would I actually pay to store this? It's amazing how much more you get rid of. So we are in that stage right now of emptying out the house and just really finding what we need and what we love and what we want to keep. Anyways, it's been an adventure. I'll be sharing a lot more of that on Instagram. We've already been in this, by the time this episode goes live, I'll have been in the process of doing all this for 6 weeks already, and we'll be getting close to move out day soon. So anyways, just giving you a little update on what's going on, but in the spirit of personal things and updates and all of that, that's where this episode was born from. I called this episode why I wake up at 5 a.m., quit coffee and other biohacky things, because I feel whether you're on Instagram or you've listened to this podcast for a while, there's so many episodes or podcasts or Instagram posts that you can go to of mine and other people where you're going to get strategy, right? And by strategy, I mean the hacks. Hey, if you want to have an amazing wind down routine, here's step 1, 2, and 3 to have that. If you want to lower your blood sugar, here are some things to think about with your breakfast. Those things are super helpful and interesting, right? And I've done a lot of content like that, much of my podcast and even some of my recent episodes. There's a lot of conversation around the how-to and the strategy. But you know what I was thinking? I was sitting there and I was like, you know what I find more interesting? Because underneath we know, breath work's important. We should get our steps. We should eat well. And that's all great. But sometimes I really love hearing why people do what they do and their thoughts on it and their opinions on it and how they view the world. And my goal is to open up bigger conversations this year about small stuff and about big stuff too. If you listened to the podcast on episode 130 and 131, I opened up the conversation on perimenopause and menopause. It was something that I realized that the demographic of my audience was likely many of them or us or in that stage, going into that stage. It's coming up for us soon. And there's just not a lot of education on it. And it's something that's there's a lot of false information out there. There's a lot of things that is not talked about. It's not researched on. So I want to be opening up bigger conversations on things that don't get enough attention, my mindset on things, my thoughts on things, and doing more episodes like this, that feel very authentic, where I'm connecting to you and we're having these types of conversations on these big things, right? Because there's a lot of things that I've changed my mind on over my 10 plus years running my business, like 16 years in the fitness industry, like things like intermittent fasting. I've done a whole episode on that. I did an entire episode on women's health things I changed my mind on. I did an entire episode on just regular stuff I've changed my mind on, birth control, all of these things. I've shared conversations on my personal medical experiences, right? And these are things like I feel conversations that are more taboo, swept under the rug, not talked about. And so these are the things I want to start bringing to the surface, because through listening to this, what is available to you is an offer to shift your thinking if you want it, right? If not, and you're like, no, I just don't agree, that's cool. We can still be friends. I love being in an environment where people have different opinions than I do. But for me, the shifts don't come in my life, like the big shifts that I've had, the quantum leaps that we've gone through as a family, the shifts never come from more things to try. And those are fun, right? Strategy is important, but they come from a shift in the way I view the world and my viewpoint. And so that's kind of what I want to introduce in this episode, is giving you viewpoints on why I do some of the odd things I do, view things the way I do. I'm specifically in this episode, I got 4 things I want to talk about today. But without further ado, if you are open and willing to just hearing some alternative opinions or thinking of it as a conversation on topics we don't talk about very often, let's jump in. So the first one, why the heck do I wake up at 5 a.m.? Because as entrepreneurs, most of us don't have times we need to get up at unless you have school age kids, right? And so we do get to set that. But I want to talk a little bit about why I wake up. And I think the reason I want to speak about it is because there is an overarching belief system in the entrepreneurial space that we should get up earlier to get more done. And we should get up earlier to get ahead on the day so that we can work more hours so that we can blah, 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 be productive, right? And there's so much conversation about if you're not waking up early like this, you're wasting your life. And so sometimes I find entrepreneurs try to jump into this 5 a.m. wake up time as a way to fit in, to be able to show it on social media, even though they feel exhausted all the time. They have brain fog. They don't feel good. Their life doesn't, it just doesn't feel right, right? And I want to first start explaining that part of the reason I wake up at 5 a.m. is because it is my chronotype. And I did an entire episode on chronotypes. It's episode 30. It's called the 5 a.m. Club Lie. And specifically, what it's speaking to is that the time that you wake up is not something you can choose, right? It's more like your eye color or your natural hair color, right? It's something you are born with. So your chronotype, or basically the clock on which your body functions, is genetically determined by something called your PER3 gene. And the shorter the gene is, the earlier you wake up. So my gene obviously is a little bit shorter. And so naturally, I found that through a couple of resources. One was a quiz I took for the powerofwhenquiz.com. You can go check that out. It gave me my chronotype, and also my Oura Ring gives me feedback based on when I'm most active during the day, my heart rate, my breathing rate, my stress, all of those things. And it says hey, this is when we think you would function best. And as it turns out, my ideal bedtime is 8:54 and my ideal wake up time is 4:54. And it's been like this for a long time. So partly it's because that is when my body is optimized. And here's the thing, really recognize this. 10 to 15% of the population is genetically geared to wake up at this time. Look how small of a percent that is, right? So I want you to let go of the guilt and all of this pressure to wake up at 5 a.m. Because if you are waking up out of alignment with your circadian rhythm, your chronotype, your body clock, you are inviting in inflammation. You are inviting in brain fog. You are inviting in just your body not working optimally, all right? So part of it is really leaning into your own chronotype. But there's also a difference between waking up at 5 a.m. and being a morning person. I think 5 a.m., I think is more of an extreme morning, right? I think also being a morning person could be waking up at 6 a.m., 6:30, even 7 a.m. for some people. And I want to kind of give you now a little bit of my mindset on why I prefer and would choose to wake up early rather than stay up late. Because many of the clients, when we first start working together, they stay up till 11, 11:30, midnight, 1, 2 a.m. even. And a lot of deciding to go to bed on time can be hard for adults because we feel like we have our bedtime procrastination where we don't want to. We feel like we shouldn't be told when to go to bed. And so I had to change my mindset on it. And I'm going to tell you, this single belief here is what made it so easy for me to be lights out by 9 p.m. every night, usually fast asleep by 9, to be quite honest, right? The real question now becomes like, why don't I stay up late? My consistent bedtime average, if I look at my Aura for the last month, has been 8:58 p.m. It's also been the same for the last year, right? And like for me, when I originally started doing it, I was like, I don't get any me time. I've got to go right to sleep. What about, time to zone out and unwind and all of that? But I'm going to share with you, here's how I see it. Evenings are for consuming. So if I stay up later, what do I end up doing? I end up scrolling Instagram. I end up watching YouTube. I end up putting on another Netflix episode. I end up eating. It's consuming, right? Like any behavior. Think about, a lot of the behavior that we have in the evening when we're just staying up is consumption type behavior. Now, for me, when I started looking at, what do I do with my mornings? Mornings are for creation. By getting up at 5, I get so much time to be in creation, right? I can write, I can work out, I can read, I can walk, I sit in the sun, I plan for the day, I meditate, I hang out with my husband. I never get up in the morning and run and turn on Netflix. I just don't. I rarely get up in the morning and scroll. That's part of a boundary that I've set with myself, but I don't do that. I never wake up in the morning and go and grab cookies. Like, it's really interesting. Do you ever desire those consumption-based activities like eating junk food, scrolling Netflix, or watching Netflix? Do you ever get that in the morning? Probably not, right? And one of the arguments one of my clients said one time is like, but I feel like going out to bed, when I go to bed early, I lose so much time. And I said to her, you know what? You aren't actually losing time by going to bed early. You gain it back on the other end of your day. So if I go to bed at 9 o'clock, I'm not losing 2 hours if I would have rather gone to bed at 11. I'm actually gaining it in the morning because I get up at 5 instead of 7. So you don't actually lose your time. You're not losing your me time. It's just getting put at the other end of your day. And I found when I looked at the activities on how I spent my mornings versus how I spent my evenings, I just really liked who I was, how I showed up, and I liked myself better in the mornings. It makes me feel better. On top of that, when I started shifting my days like this, I no longer rush in the morning. Like when I used to wake up at 7:30 and have to be out the door by 8:30 or, all of that breakfast, I felt rushed and I really don't enjoy starting my day in rush. So now that I'm waking up earlier, my days feel very long and my mornings feel very luxurious because I feel like there's something special about morning energy that you just can't replicate. So while my family sometimes jokes about my robot bedtime, what I mean by robot bedtime is I am in bed by 8:15 at the latest. Pretty much, I would say in a whole year, I'll maybe stay up 5 nights later than that. And some people call it boring. Some people say it's not spontaneous, robot, whatever you want to call it. But for me, I have rearranged the schedule in my life to be from 5 a.m. until 9 p.m. That's my time. Somebody else's might be 8 to midnight. It's not a big deal, but this is just how I view things. Is like I like who I am better and I like creating. And so I'm going to spend my time in the morning doing that because if I just stay up at late, I'm just going to eat and I'm going to scroll and I'm going to distract myself and I'm going to zone out and my life feels not better for that. So yes, I wake up at 5 a.m. because that's my chronotype. But the real reason I wake up at 5 a.m. is I just like who I am better when I spend the hours of my day in the morning versus the evening. And all of a sudden, when I noticed that I had all the time, but I liked how I chose to use it better, I stopped fighting with myself so much on going to bed. And I just honestly, I love my robot bedtime, my militant bedtime. Not everyone has to embrace that, but it has created the satisfaction with my life that I have now. And I just wouldn't trade that for anything. So that is why I wake up at 5 a.m. But maybe the bigger question is why I quit coffee. Now, I have never been that big of a coffee drinker. I used to drink a lot more coffee pre-kids, but naturally when I got pregnant, I tapered it back quite a bit. So I tapered it back to about a quarter. So what it looked like before was when I'd make coffee in the morning on my drip coffee maker, I would do like 4 tablespoons of coffee, and then I did it all the way back and, what do they call it? Scaled down until 1 tablespoon. So we're at a quarter of the amount of coffee now, and the rest was decaf. And, it was fine. And then I was enjoying that and doing that 1 cup a week. But I'm prone to anxiety. I am prone to stress and overwhelm. My body likes to go to that state very easily. It's a familiar state for me, and I don't like being there. And so I knew, like, psychologically that, like, this is not serving who I want to be, is to have this coffee. But if you go on the internet, you can find studies and you can find people that, support your brain saying 1 cup of coffee is fine. 1 cup of coffee is actually healthy. 1 cup of coffee will make you live longer. Like, you can find that stuff out there 100%. And you will always find support for what you seek to believe. I think it's called like cognitive bias or something, is like or confirmation bias. That's what it's called. When you go out looking for something to support what you want to believe instead of just deciding to believe it on your own. So this was what my brain was doing with coffee. I'm like, you know what? 1 cup a day is fine. It's not a problem. I noticed that I had anxiety, but it always has that, right? So I was thinking it couldn't be that much of an issue. But when we went to Panama in January, I quit coffee by accident. When I showed up at the first Airbnb, like, we got switched Airbnbs like 2 days before we got to Panama. And the Airbnb we got to was not ready for guests. Like, it had 4 wine glasses instead of cups, and we had kids. It had like, I had no like face cloths or anything. It only had 2 towels. Like, they were not ready for us. And the other thing they did not have was a coffee maker. And I was like, oh my gosh, we were up on the 44th floor of this high rise in this really busy area of Panama City. And I was like, we get up at 5. I do not want to walk. My kids are sleeping. I don't want to walk by myself in this city that I'm not familiar with yet just to get a cup of coffee. And so I had headaches for the first, 5 days that I was in Panama, and I didn't have any coffee. And I was like, okay, well, I'm doing okay. So when we moved to the next city, funny enough, they had the most beautiful gym. And I think I've told about this gym on the podcast before, but like, this gym in this second Airbnb we stayed at it was a full gym with glass windows all the way around, east facing. So I got up, I was in the gym at 6 a.m. every morning, and I watched the sunrise while I worked out. It was absolutely blissful. But what I started noticing was that when I worked out in the mornings, like 6 a.m., instead of, working in the mornings and then doing exercise later on in the day, that energy boost that I got from exercise actually replaced the same experience that coffee gave me. So I had been off coffee for 5 or 6 days, and now I'm working out in the morning. And I'm noticing my energy is great and I'm feeling good. And I was like, this is amazing. Then I noticed I have more stable energy and I'm not so tired in the afternoon. This is fantastic. And over that month that I spent at that Airbnb in Panama with the gym, like, I still am consistently scoring about 1:36. That was that month average, my month average in deep sleep, 1:36. The goal is 60 minutes. So I am like absolutely obliterating that goal. I looked back, and the years so far, so keep in mind I went to Panama in January. I'm recording this now in July. My average is 1:34 of deep sleep per night, with my goal being 60 minutes. So this is amazing. And you might be asking, why am I talking about deep sleep? Well, when we have caffeine, it directly affects our ability to fall and have deep sleep. So when you have caffeine specifically, and I did 2 episodes. I think one is called One Shift to Knock Out Afternoon Energy Dips on the podcast. That is all about caffeine. And I think I did another one early on when I started the podcast, and it was like caffeine hacks to rewire your brain, I believe. That was episode 16. Anyways, I talk about how specifically when you put caffeine in your body, it occupies the same receptors in your brain that a chemical called adenosine does. And adenosine is what makes you feel tired. So if you block those receptors and adenosine can't get in there because there's caffeine in your system, you don't feel that natural fatigue, right? And then naturally you don't fall asleep and have the same quality of sleep, and it affects your deep sleep. Deep sleep is what is responsible for your brain and your body restoration. Super important, right? And then the other thing that changed is I also noticed, since I have now quit caffeine, even if it wasn't 100% my decision at the time, My average for the past month sleep scores have been 93 on my Oura Ring, which is very high. I sleep very deeply. There's not a lot of restlessness, no tossing and turning, and I'm no longer relying on coffee because everyone has different sensitivity levels with caffeine. And even if you are like, I'm not sensitive to caffeine, I might implore you to explore that relationship because you never know. I always thought I was fine, and it's not until you remove it and you get through that initial week, 2 weeks, that's a little tough at the beginning. I really got to meet myself and see who I am without it, right? And I recognized, like, even though I was having such a small amount, it screws with my cortisol. My body is in a state of anxiety when caffeine is present, and I don't need more of that. And now I can tell you, I feel great in the mornings. And at first, when I quit, it was the experience I missed. And that was what I was most worried about is like, wouldn't it be nice to just hold a cup of coffee right now in the morning and I'm on the deck and it's so nice. And I thought that wouldn't go away. And I was just okay with that discomfort, that mild discomfort in the morning. But now I honestly don't even miss the experience. And I feel good and I don't notice I'm missing it anymore. I even don't think about it. I'll have the odd cup every week or two, but I don't miss it. Like I don't think about it. And it is so freeing. And it is part of becoming who I am because I'm continuously cleaning out my body of things that no longer serve me, things that I do not need, things that are affecting my hormones negatively. And you can really only find that out by experimenting. You are always welcome to add coffee back in. But how will you know if you do not try? And so the second thing is, like I said, why I quit coffee. Wait just a second. If you're seeking that edge in energy and focus that will boost your brain into peak performance so you can get more work done in less time, well, I've got the perfect toolkit for you. My top 12 biohacks are all bundled into one handy playbook for entrepreneurs called 12 Ways to Biohack Your Energy. With it, you can empower your daily routines, eliminate brain fog, and elevate the energy in your mornings. If you want to grab it for free, click the link in the show notes. So let's get into some of the odd, more mindset things that I have. This next one I want to talk to you about is funny. I was hesitant to put this in the episode originally. I was hesitant to put this whole episode out just because of this one. And I was like, maybe I'll just swap it out for something else. But then I thought to myself, you know what? Every time I put out an episode that makes me feel uncomfortable, I find my people more. Meaning I put out the episodes on women's health things that changed my mind, and the amount of people that reached out being like, that was an amazing episode. I was like, okay, so I'm really practicing and just saying my thoughts, even though they're controversial, because that's what makes us all different, right? Our different thoughts. So in this next one, I invite you to take off your hat that has all your beliefs of how you've always seen things and try to see this from a neutral perspective. The way I kind of think about it is imagine if you were an alien coming to Earth and I was explaining this to you and you had no preconceived notion, you knew nothing about our species, why we did anything. That's kind of how I like to view new things or things that challenge my way of thinking. And this way of thinking is that I don't believe in the moderation mindset, the everything in moderation. Now, I will say this. You are totally welcome to believe in everything in moderation. Nothing is that bad if you only have a little bit of it, because genuinely, I imagine that this works for some people because of the current relationship with themselves or how much work they've done on their thoughts and their emotions and their emotional intelligence and their awareness, right? And I'm not saying you need to think this way, but this is how I think. So when I say moderation mindset, I genuinely think how everyone says with alcohol, everything in moderation. Or some people with marijuana, everything in moderation. Or some people with junk food, everything in moderation, right? And there's this interesting mindset that we know that these things are harmful for our health, but if we have a little of it, it's not bad because then it makes me feel balanced, right? We have this thought, but I've always thought about it a little differently, and this came up on a walk with my husband and I the other day where we were talking about this idea. It's so weird how in today's culture, if you eat real healthy food all of the time, you are labeled as extreme. Now, I'm not talking about, restricted, eating when we talk about eating disorders. But if you just choose to eat whole healthy foods or maybe organic or you choose to say no to desserts, that you are labeled extreme. I find that very weird. Or if you choose to work out 6 to 7 days a week, you're obsessed. Or if you choose not to poison yourself with food or alcohol, you're missing out. Or if you choose to not say yes to the drink, you're boring, or you're too stiff, or you're, dull. Like, it's so interesting that there are these generalized mentalities that help us justify the alcohol or the food. And again, this is not me judging. This is just my mindset on this. And I think it's so weird that nobody ever looks at someone eating cheesies and says, oh, you must not care about your health at all. You're unhealthy. Even though these cheesies have like this red dye in them, that's actually a neurotoxin that literally poisons your brain. It is socially acceptable to label people that are very invested in their health and choose not to poison themselves as extreme, yet it would be considered rude if someone said, why are you eating so unhealthy? You must not care about your health when it comes to something that would poison our brain. It's fascinating. And I think honestly, a lot of it is not our fault, but conditioning from food companies, right? They are funding so much of the research that in nutrition. And so much of what we're told and what we're marketed to is that this is about joy and this is about family and everything in moderation, even though it's wild because we have so many people in this country and these countries, all of the world, that are walking around with diabetes, heart disease, cancer, severe joint pain. That is all, these things are all linked to inflammation, yet we are knowingly ingesting things that cause inflammation and saying it's okay because it's in moderation, yet then we have to go home and take 2 Advil because our back is sore or we have headaches or anything else. Do you kind of get where I'm going with this? It's very fascinating when you look at this from an isn't that interesting and a curiosity perspective rather than this is what brings me comfort, this is what brings me joy conversation, right? So there is an entrepreneur that I find him fascinating. His name is Brian Johnson. I can't even remember where I first heard about him. If you go on YouTube, you will find him. One of my favorite interviews he has ever done. If you search up his name, Brian Johnson, he did an episode on the Rich Roll podcast. Rich is an R-I-C-H, Roll is R-O-L-L podcast. I listened to this when we were traveling between cities in Panama, and my gosh, did my brain crack open. So Brian Johnson, his whole foundation of thinking is that we are not able to make adequate health decisions to keep ourselves alive. And it's fantastic. He says humans are one of the only species that are slowly killing themselves on purpose. And we do things that cause illness and disease and slowly kill ourselves, right? And he is doing this experiment with his body. He spends over $2 million a year to try to reverse aging. And I think he's 45 years old right now. And he has publicly, for free, published everything he is doing. And if you just literally Google Brian Johnson protocol, he goes over his exercise, his food, what he eats, how he sleeps. He's a big proponent of sleep as well, but showing how if we decided to not do things that were self-destructive, because humans are unbelievably self-destructive when it comes to the way we think, the way we act, what we ingest, how we treat ourselves. Some of it known, like sometimes we know food's bad for us, but then there's some like chemicals we're putting on our body that are, what's the word for it? They affect your estrogen, right? They affect your hormones, right? So anyways, Brian has come up with this fascinating idea is like, if I could remove all the self-destructive behaviors of my body, it will give me long enough amount of time to live until technology and AI can get to the point where it can extend human life. Because if he can make it to age 50 or 55 before AI comes up with this technology to extend human life, he's going to be in much better condition. And I thought that is so neat. And he also talks a little bit about this concept that like if AI could create the ideal health protocol to take care of you and it would be exactly what you need, would you follow it? I mean, you wouldn't have to worry about making any decisions. It would just be about follow through. Would you do it? If an AI said, this is exactly how you need to eat, exercise, how much you need to move, all of this, and you will have a long and healthy lifespan, but you had to stick to it, would you do it? And the conversation he brings up around this is fascinating because as soon as our brain goes, no, I would miss out on cake. No, I wouldn't be able to do things around with family vacations or whatever like that, it really starts to reveal so much of our mindset on our cultural integration of food into celebration, the cultural integration of joy in food, right? And so it's fascinating. He talks about you really have to say no to society to be able to say yes to your health. And would you take that trade? It's amazing. I tell you, so many things to think about. And it really had me thinking about this idea of moderation mindset. And the way he phrased it really influenced my opinion of what if thinking everything in moderation was just a way to justify slowly, self-destructively poisoning ourselves, right? And now I do want to say, and having said that, this is a thought experiment. This is a way of exploring this conversation with you. And I do want to say, I'm not perfect at this. Just because I believe this doesn't mean I don't eat garbage food sometimes. It does not mean I don't do things that affect my health negatively. I'm not perfect, right? But I really just also don't agree with that. You should have one cheat day a week for moderation. I really genuinely believe that when we have these mindsets around healthy being extreme or restrictive or we need moderation, I think what that really does is highlights a mindset thing that is available for you to work on if you want. Right? If your brain is I am stressed out and that is justification to eat this food, which I know causes inflammation in my body, maybe we look at instead the underlying cause. And I think a lot of this does come down to education as well, because you rewind me 10 years ago, I didn't know half the stuff I know now. I didn't know about the hazards of blue light at night. I didn't know about seed oils. I did not know about the chemicals in the lotions and the shampoos that we use. I didn't know a lot of this. But when I know better, I can do better. Right? And so this podcast is a beautiful example of a whole bunch of episodes that can allow you to know more so that you have the option to choose to do better. You don't have to, but for me, I always love more, not from the sake of I am not enough now, but more from the place of what could be possible for me, and that I know I deserve that to take my brain and my energy and my body to that next level. I firmly believe that. I am deserving of that. And when I know more, I do more. And like I said, I'm not perfect. I still have food every once in a while, but I just don't subscribe to the fact that I'm going to have this because moderation is, as something essential to humans. I have a set of beliefs that deeply values health, deeply. It's not something that, oh gosh, I take it or leave it based on convenience or emotion or social pressures. I value health deeply. And I cannot wrap my head around how we have normalized these beliefs around regularly poisoning ourselves, for a lack of a better word, with alcohol, drugs, cheesies, food that we know is bad for us, but we call it moderation because it makes us feel better when we call it that. So I don't look at food and think, oh, it's moderation, it won't hurt me, because I know it will. Although the dose is small, 100%. If I have cheesies, 100% the dose is small. But I'm lying to myself when I say that those are not negatively affecting my body, because it will, right? It causes inflammation. Your body, your brain cells, the cells of your heart, the cells of your skin, everything is, you know what it's made from? The food that you eat. If you eat crap, your cells become made of crap. If it is poor quality processed food, your body will be made of that. And then we wonder why we have inflammation and disease and illness and brain fog. So you're right. It's a tiny dose. But we're lying to ourselves when we say it won't hurt. Because I genuinely think on a small scale, it does. And it adds up. It's cumulative, right? You're right. One won't do anything. maybe not 2. But when we start doing this regularly and telling ourselves that we need moderation to make our life easier, I think for me, it's a lie I don't want to tell myself. So whenever I am choosing these foods, whether it be cake at a birthday party or, cookies in the afternoon or whatever it is like that, for me, I know it is always so I can feel something or not feel like something. It is never from a place of health or thinking that moderation is key. It is because I want to feel something. I want to be included. I want to celebrate with the family. I want to taste something good so that I can get a pleasure dopamine hit. I want to have the experience of the food, right? I want that feeling. Or maybe it's because I don't want to feel. I don't want to feel stress. I don't want to feel overwhelmed. I don't want to feel boredom. I don't want to feel all of the things, right? And by the way, if this is resonating at all, definitely go back and check out episode 124. It's called How to Stop Emotional Eating. And it is beautiful on really identifying these deep underlying feelings. But I know that when I choose a food that is poison to my body, it is always in favor of feeling something or not feeling like something. And for me, it is a mindset issue that shows up as something that is available for me to address. So that's how I like to look at it, because nobody needs these foods. Nobody needs foods with seed oils. Nobody needs foods that are highly processed with trans fat and all of these things that are literally slowing us down and creating brain fog and inflammation. And I know this is extreme. And if you're hearing this now and you've never really thought about it this way, I'm hoping that it just opens up a possibility or something you've never thought about before. And I have this belief that I just genuinely don't believe food makes my life better at all. I choose to go out and make my life better so I don't need to poison myself to feel it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like I don't eat food to make my life better and feel joy. I choose to go and actually make my life better so that food does not have to be what creates that. Again, just my opinion. And it's different. Like if you go and eat a delicious salad and you love that and that brings you joy, isn't that different than going eating a box of cookies to make your life better so you could feel better? I would just rather work on the underlying issues going on in my life. It is a hard journey. It is not easy, but it is worthwhile, because when I know better, I do better. I do not want to wait for a health scare to make a change. And I always have this thought of like, if I got sick, would I be looking back on my life and kicking myself and being like, why was all of this pain, this illness, maybe I am I have cancer, heart disease, whatever it is, was it really worth it? It's just good questions to ask yourself. But anyways, that's my thoughts on moderation mindset. So let's lighten up a little bit for this last one here. And let's talk about what I do with bad data. So the data I'm talking about specifically is the data we get from our wearable trackers. So Oura Rings, Fitbits, Apple Watches, Garmin's, Whoop, whatever you want to use, right? So I'll often have clients that'll get anxious about bad data, or they'll be like, oh my gosh, this night of data was terrible. How can I delete it so that it doesn't affect my stats? Oh my gosh, this was a certain day that I was sick. Don't look at that day. You know what I mean? Or like they're obsessing about getting the numbers right, or they feel like they're fixated on the numbers, right? I don't want to look at the data, and they feel all this anxiety around it. Well, I'm going to tell you that I have a really peculiar way of looking at bad data, because I have bad sleeps sometimes. I have very stressful days sometimes. I have all of these kind of normal human experiences happen to me, and I don't look at them as like, oh, it's a setback. I have failed. I'm not keeping up with my healthy habits. Something's gone wrong. The way my brain works is I love to look at things through curiosity. I wonder why that's happening. Isn't that neat, right? And I use bad data because I find it so fun. Like if I'm going to be sick, or if I'm going to be really stressed out, like I want to get some good understanding on how it affects my body, and then I'm not going to get upset about it. I'm going to give you some examples here. When our landlord asked us to move out, it was so, I was like talking to her at the door, and, she gave us the notices and stuff like that. And I was like, oh yeah, that's fine. But as soon as the door shut, I had this adrenaline rush that you would not believe. it was so intense to the point that I started shivering, like uncontrollable shivering, because my nervous system had been set off so bad of like the instant panic that hits of like, holy crap, life's going to change. And I started shivering and I told my husband, I'm like, I can't stop shaking right now. And I likened it to after I delivered my second daughter, like I think I was at the hospital, honestly, 20 minutes when she came. Like the whole labor was exceptionally fast. And that whole time after I delivered her, I was shivering uncontrollably. And so obviously this is how my nervous system reacts to that, right? And I was like, and then I started crying just because my body was like, didn't know what to do with this pent up anxiety and energy. And then I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to breathe right now. And so I did my physiological sigh. And, you know, if you listen to the episode I did on breath work, you'll know exactly from last week, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's that inhale, exhale. I did this breath work technique and calmed myself down. Now, about an hour later, I jumped onto my Oura ring and I'm like, I'm so curious how my body reacted. And I actually screenshotted it because it's so amazing. My body went from a state of restoration, like the deepest relaxation you can be in. I was watching a movie with my family. It spiked all the way to the top of the graph. I mean, like it hit the top of stressed out. And then it came back down. And instead of being like, oh my gosh, look at that, I was like, how cool is that? Like, I actually got to see my body respond in real time. Like, I got to see my breathwork practice actually work. How cool. The other thing, like when I was pregnant, my stats were like a hot mess. Like my readiness was crap. My resting heart rate was high, all of this. But I was like, how cool is this that I get to see what my body does from the inside when I'm pregnant? Another really good example, when we went to Panama, the trip there was, I'd say, top 5 most stressful days of my life. We got on the plane, and I'm a bit of a nervous flyer to begin with. I have, since Panama, found some coping techniques for this, but I was a nervous flyer. And so that was a lot of stress, and obviously the prep and the locking up the house in the morning before we left and all of that kind of stuff. And then when we got off of our second flight that day, we had to go and stay in like a hotel nearby. But it was a really messy situation. We couldn't find out where the shuttle was. And we ended up standing, me, my husband, all our baggage, and 2 girls on the median of this like busy thoroughfare in the airport for like an hour and a half, trying to get the kids to stay close because there's traffic everywhere. But this is where we stand for the shuttle. And like when I went to go look at my data the next day, like I felt like absolute turd after traveling like that. But it was so cool to see that I spent 12 hours and 45 minutes at the peak of stress while on that whole travel day. And it was really cool. Like I now see how my body responds to travel, right? Or when I was sick and got COVID, or when I get my cycle every month. Like you just begin to learn your body. And instead of looking at a night of bad sleep as like, holy crap, I'm like, cool. So when I look at screens before bed, and I was watching an adrenaline-based show, like, look at all these wake-ups that I have. Like, cool. Now I know better that maybe I won't do that. And if I do choose to do that before bed, I know my sleep's not going to be so great. So I love getting bad data because I love sharing it. Like so many of the things I share on Instagram, I think I have a whole like highlight on the Instagram, like, those little circles they have on the profile. And I think it's called like Biohacking Fun. And you can see all of the like the weird stuff that my data has done over the years so that I can learn for it. So not only does this let me watch for things, but now I know what things are likely to set my nervous system off, right? I have developed coping strategies to help bring my nervous system back down, to help recover quickly, adjust my expectations. Like when I go through my monthly cycle, I know that my readiness and sleep scores drop in those last 7 to 10 days. So I don't beat myself up. I'm like, cool, that's the body doing its thing. Totally makes sense. Body releases more stress hormone at this time. Totally makes sense. Blood sugar's unstable at this time. Like I look at my body as a fun experiment that I am creating. And you don't create all on wins. There's loses, there's wins. What's important is that you're always learning. And this information has helped bad days, getting sick, traveling, not being able to stay on plan, so much more interesting. And I think the main thing is that I come at it with a mindset of curiosity and fascination. So anyways, those are the 4 things that I wanted to chit chat with you about today. Why I wake up at 5 a.m., why I quit coffee, moderation mindsets, and what I do with bad data. if you like this kind of episode, do you mind swinging by my Instagram and letting me know? And if there's something you want my take on, like you like this style of episode and you're like, hey, what's your take on this? What's your take on this? I will start creating a list, and every time I get 4 new ones, I will make an episode like this because, like I said, it's the how-tos and the strategies. Those are fun, but that's never where the change comes from. It comes from being exposed to a mindset that might be different than yours, and you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it this way. And if you are open and willing to receiving different ideas, you can always keep what you love and send back energetically, like, nope, I don't love that. Send back what you don't. And I think that's what makes this community and this podcast so good, is that we are able to hear things that contrast our opinions, ask why from curiosity and fascination, and be able to grow our thinking and our mindset. And if you love this type of conversation, if you love having your thinking on traditional health or your mindset or whatever it is challenged, you would love my program, Becoming Limitless. It is a program designed for 6 and 7 figure entrepreneurs that allows us to come together and we coach on all of this kind of stuff. So you get all the hows. Like there's a full built out program where you can watch videos until the cows come home on all of the how stuff. But it is in our community. The community is full of driven entrepreneurs, right? Who are willing to challenge the status quo, are open-minded, and at the same time, they want more. They know they're made for more. They want that next level up. And this is where we come to explore the edges of those possibilities. And we do that not only in our community, our Slack community, in which we converse back and forth, but on our weekly coaching calls. And this group is amazing right now. The group that I'm working with, we are open to conversation and receiving and sharing ideas. And it's not just me leading the calls. There's people jumping in with their ideas. I love this community that has been built in Becoming Limitless. It's available to you, and I would love to invite you to check it out. I will make sure I leave a link in the description. Or you can just head to TanessaShears.com/becominglimitless. Read all about it. If you have questions, I'm more than open to answering those questions for you. And of course, if you want to fast track the whole experience, I do open 2 to 3 one-on-one spots. And of course, if those are available, I would love to invite you on a consultation and see if you are a good fit. But this program honestly has been the culmination of years of expanding my mindset, of learning what is possible, of biohacks, of health, and of not subjecting myself to the status quo because that was how maybe I was raised or that is what society says. So the Becoming Limitless program really is that place where you can come to build a system for your health that is specific to you, works for you, data-based. We use Aura rings. It's a pretty cool spot. But anyways, I hope you've loved this episode. Like I said, pop into my DMs. Tell me you love it if you love it. Tell me what you want to hear on it. And I'll talk to you next week. Have a beautiful week. Bye. Hey, if you love listening to this podcast, then you have to come check out my coaching program, Becoming Limitless. Together, we'll build a sustainable system for your health that is based in science and data that fits seamlessly into your busy schedule. Join me over at TanessaShears.com/becoming limitless. I'll see you there.